right. Welcome everyone. Thank you so much for being here. I know I'm sure many of you are impacted by the winter storms that came through this past weekend all over the country. And so we appreciate you taking the time to be here and hope you're all warm and safe. Really pleased to introduce our two speakers today from Tree Fund. We have Paul Putman, the president and CEO, and Jonathan Cain, communication and engagement manager. The title of their presentation today is Cultivating Innovation, Tree Research and Education Endowment Fund, and Impact on Tree Research. Since 2002, Tree Fund has been shaping the future of trees and the arboriculture profession. Having just passed the $6 million mark awarded in grants and scholarships, Tree Fund has made a giant impact on the tree care industry by funding research that focuses on stopping diseases and pests, improving overall tree survival, worker safety, best practices, and more. And in addition to hearing about how Tree Fund has impacted the field, we'll also hear about their annual Tour de Trees bike ride that I'm personally really excited to hear about. That has been going on since the early 90s and is a fundraising event that supports tree research and passing along its importance to the public. Before I hand it over to them, though, I did want to mention a thank you to Katie Donaldson from the University of Tennessee School of Natural Resources. She is behind this webinar series, doing a lot of work and working with us in partnership. And then for those of you who are regulars here, you might be wondering why you're not hearing from Hannah Imagine Shaw, our regular host. She is the Tennessee State Director for ISA Southern and a board member for TUFC as well. She's unable to be here today, but wanted to thank her as well. She had a big hand in pulling this together. Yeah, without further ado, I will hand it over to Katie to go over some info on CEUs and housekeeping, and then we'll get started.
All right. Thank you, Kevin. I'm sharing my screen now. Um, for those of you who are seeking ISA CEUs and SAF CFEs, please make sure that you have registered and paid the $10 fee. And please make sure your full name is showing in order to get credit. And you can do that by going to the Participants tab, clicking on the three little dots and renaming yourself to whatever name you used whenever you registered. That just helps us to ensure that you get those ISA CEU credits or those SAF CFEs. If you are just here as a general participant, no payment is necessary. Also, if you are a TUFC member, you do not have to worry about paying the $10 fee. If you have questions throughout the presentation, please enter those in the chat and we will get to those at the very end of the presentation during our Q&A session. And I believe that's it.
All right. Thanks, Katie. I'll pass it over to Paul and Jonathan.
All right. Thanks so much. And good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're tuning in from. Want to start out by saying, a big thank you to Imagine and Kevin and Katie and everyone for the invitation to talk a little bit about Tree Fund and for coordinating all the logistics. They make it seem so smooth and simple, but there's a lot that goes on behind it. So thank you so much for all of this. Also, I wanted to say hello to our friends in the chat. So can you, George from Vegas, thank you for starting out. One of the traditions we have with Tree Fund for our educational webinar series that we do is we ask people if they would like to say hello in the chat. Just, hello, who you are, where you're from. And I feel like today we should probably put something about the number of inches of snow that you've been dealing with, if you would like, just kind of as a way to bring everyone into the room. Today we have a number of slides that we're going to talk through, and we'll have plenty of time at the end for questions and answer to help you learn a little bit more about Tree Fund. And I'm just going to move some windows around so we can get started. All right. So our goal today, we want to provide you an overview of Tree Fund, what it is that we do, how we might be helpful to you, provide a few insights into some of the current research that's been funded, and to make sure that everyone knows about Tour de Trees. So for those of you in Tennessee, it will be very close to you this September, so we're going to talk more about that. All right. Our identity is in our name. For those of you who have never heard of us, Tree Research and Education Endowment Fund, the acronym is Tree Fund. And part of our mission is not just to fund the research that's needed by arborists and tree care professionals all over the world, but also to share that, to get the word out about the research. If the research does not get out to you, what good is it if it's just in a journal or just on someone's shelf somewhere? So by funding research grants, we hope that we get the cutting edge critical information, gets into the hands of the workers who care for our urban forests. Through our education grant program, we hope that the importance of trees and proper tree care will be shared throughout our communities. And through our scholarship programs, our student scholarships, we help position the arborists and urban foresters of tomorrow to help grow the future of the industry. We'll talk more about our free webinar series, along with presentations by researchers that we have funded. We also get the word out by articles and publications like ISA's Arboriculture and Urban Forestry Journal. And for those of you who are not aware, that's now free, available online. All of this cutting information then gets out into the world. Our research helps ensure that healthy, mature trees remain integral to our communities for generations to come. The gains made through tree fund supported research are significant. Our work has helped define strategies for enhancing tree disease suppression and insect resistance. It's helped develop production, planting, fertilizing, and soil amendment strategies to enhance tree growth and long-term survival. It's helped develop more environmentally sensitive methods of plant management and helped produce genetically superior trees that can withstand the stress of urban environments. It's also helped examine techniques for keeping tree care workers safer and more. Most of our research grant applications are going to be available on August 1st. Our spring process for anyone who would like to apply for a grant is currently open, and that includes the Utility Arboriculture Research Fund, which awards grants of up to $50,000. Our scholarships are supporting the next generation of arborists and researchers. Those applications are also available right now. Scholarships are in the amount of $5,000 each. So I mentioned our community education grants, and these are designed to help local groups educate general public about the trees in their communities and how they're cared for. So the main one that we work with is the Davy Tree Expert Company Community Arboriculture Education Grant Program, and just awarded its first education grants last year, and those went to a cooperative extension in New York and a small college in Minnesota. Each group received a $5,000 grant. These grants fund support for education training in tree care and/or urban forestry topics. So anyone on this call who works with community groups working with arboriculture and urban forestry, we encourage you to share information about the education grant. We also do have, if anyone's tuning in from Ohio, we host an education grant for the Ohio chapter of ISA, which provides arboriculture education grants for projects within that state. I mentioned scholarships. Last year, we had nearly 140 students involved in the spring application cycle, so competition was significant. Applications are available now. These are $5,000 awards for someone studying its formal education. So it might be at a community college, it might be a four-year institution, and these are for undergraduate students with majors in a variety of areas. We encourage you to share this information with anyone you know who might be attending college or university. 6 different programs, and this year we were able to award 10 $5,000 scholarships. So there's a lot of information in arboriculture and urban forestry that really seems like common knowledge. It's just things that we know, but that wasn't necessarily the case not that long ago. So we know that the research that we fund is vital to our industry and to the workers in the field and in the office to help care for trees in the right way and to do so safely. Mentioned that we have granted out over $6 million since 2002. It's resulted in hundreds of scientific articles and informed so much of the work that everyone on this call does today. Dr. Rich Hauer and Andrew Koser, who is Tree Fund's current chair of research and education, they've been helping us explore our history and more of how Tree Fund research is behind many of the current common beliefs. So in 2018, they first presented on key findings on those beliefs that were informed by research that was first funded by Tree Fund. So this is common knowledge, like the belief that deep planting isn't so great for trees. Knowledge like smaller trees establish faster than larger trees. research that was first funded by Tree Fund, the knowledge that mulching is good practice and that volcano mulching isn't such great practice, knowledge that we can engineer better planting spaces, especially in our urban environments. These are just a few examples of the research that's been done in the past that seems like common knowledge today that wasn't always considered common knowledge, and Tree Fund helped supported that. Also wanted to share some of the current research. Now, my disclaimer is that I am not the researcher. So for those of you who have questions about the research itself, we encourage you to check out our webinars. They're archived through our website on YouTube. You can search our website for any topic that you might be curious about. And we'll also share a little bit about upcoming webinars as well, so you can see those and what they're all about. So researchers that are funded by Tree Fund, they're continually putting out new findings to help care for trees all around the world. Our research reports come out 1 or 2 times a year, depending on when the research is completed, and those highlight the latest findings and cutting-edge research that drives the industry forward. All the research findings that have been submitted over the years can be found on our research archive page of our website. So one recently completed study was done by Peter Hattensek out of Malaysia, and he studied termite nests and their effect on tree growth. He's going to be sharing his findings during a Tree Fund webinar in a few weeks on February 10th, and he discovered that the reduced presence of fungal pathogens near termite nests might be a promising sign that termites may actually help trees resist disease naturally. This study was completed last year, and Andrew Benson and Justin Morgenroth, Morgenroth is from the University of Canterbury in New Zealand. They studied root pruning in mature trees and researched the best time of year to prune the roots. And they were lucky that they had a municipality in New Zealand that had 30 mature trees that they let them experiment on. And the results indicate that root pruning before summer growing season and intermodally is the best approach. For that webinar in November, we had over 1,200 people from around the world who joined us to learn more about this root pruning research. And continuing on the theme of pruning, Stella D. from the University of Massachusetts Amherst studied the effects of different pruning regimens, and her research calls into question the prevailing sense among practitioners that reduction cuts are lower impact on trees compared to removal cuts. This was a fascinating study that was done. Encourage anyone who's curious about this or who might be thinking to yourself, I don't agree with that. That sounds different, to check out the webinar. It's now archived on our website. If you're not already connected to us, we encourage you to scan the QR code, and Jonathan will drop the link to sign up for our newsletter in the chat. Newsletter only comes out once a month. We don't spam you with things. Each time we give you an update on some current research that was completed recently, and it tells you about our upcoming webinars and things like that. These are all free, thanks to the participation of ISA chapters and our sponsors. We're able to offer these at no charge to participants. Last year, we had over 7,000 people from around the globe watch our 7 webinars. They offer an ISA CEU, as this one does. Typically, they take place on Tuesdays at noon Central Time. Sometimes we shift that for our researchers who might be in the Netherlands or in New Zealand and other parts of the world. So this slide has a couple of our upcoming webinars. The photo, by the way, is from Andrew Benson and Justin Morgenroth, their recent presentation on root pruning. This theme, we seem to have a theme this spring, just due to the webinar or the research that was completed recently, and the webinars will be centering on diseases and pests, and the topics may vary throughout the year. So if you've not been on one of our webinars, all of the research is fascinating. It's all very innovative, and all Tree Fund research is designed to be of practical use to arborists and urban foresters. You need to be able to use it out in the field for it to be funded by Tree Fund. So at this point, I want to turn it over to my colleague, Jonathan Cain, who's going to talk a little bit more about the Tour de Trees.
Great. Thank you, Paul. Appreciate it. Appreciate the information. And thank you all for having us here again. I just wanted to reiterate what Paul said. It's great to be able to interact with everybody. And I am here to talk about the Tour de Trees bike ride, which is our annual ride that we do, which has been taking place since 1992. And some of our riders have actually been riding since that first year, even though there were only about 13 riders that year. Now we get in the 80s and 90s every year of riders that come out from all over the country and also internationally sometimes to join us for our rides each year. And actually, this year's ride, we are going to be pretty close to where a lot of you are at. We are going to be in the Blue Ridge Mountains area of South and North Carolina, riding from from Greenville, South Carolina, up to Asheville. It's a 5 day ride that we do. You end up covering about 330 miles, and that's pretty typical for the Tour de Trees. So throughout our history, we have gone to many different places over the years. Actually, in all those years, we barely hit the same state twice. So obviously, we're running out of states and running out of locations. But each time we go and we do that, we do go to different locations every year. So if you're someone that rides with us multiple years, you get to see many different parts of the country you may not have ever bothered to even think of going to sometimes, because sometimes we'll ride through a lot of very small towns. And the point of everything is to interact with those in the community and talk about talk about trees and our urban forests and proper tree care and all that. So you might ask a little bit more, what is the Tour de Trees? And the important part is that it is a bike ride where not only is it a fundraiser for Tree Fund, but it is an outreach event where we spread the word about the importance of trees and the importance of tree research. So this year's ride is going to take place from September 12th through 18th. Like I said, it's a 5 day ride that we're going to do. So that's 7 days total with a check-in and a checkout date. Um, as I mentioned, our riders represent all aspects of the tree care industry. A lot of them are certified arborists. A lot of them are researchers and presenters themselves, and some of them are just folks that work with different companies. And then obviously we'll have other people that are just bike enthusiasts there. But everybody that comes is very in tune with the tree care industry and with everything that's going on as far as the need for research. And that's why they come out and they ride each year with us. And as I mentioned, and the thing that I'm going to focus on a little bit today, the Tour de Trees is not just a fundraiser, but it is an outreach event. It's actually Tree Fund's largest outreach event every year, and it's a time that we can actually talk with different groups, either ones that are already connected to trees and tree research and tree care, or groups that are not. Throughout the week, we'll schedule multiple outreach events along our route to talk about trees. The purpose of these outreach events is to, in part, uphold Tree Fund's mission about disseminating new knowledge in arboriculture. And for instance, in this picture right here, you'll see a lot of our Tour de Trees riders grouped up with the Lions Club from Empire, Michigan. So this photo was taken last year. It was a great group photo. They came out for an aid station that we were at, and we got to interact with their whole group. They are very engaged with cleaning up the parks in their city, and they're trying to work with some of the other um, um, neighboring communities to talk about how they can improve their parks. And part of that is the tree planting and the tree care for those parks, and then for the cities and how they can get everything to improve in their areas. So we work with local groups on engagement. And these groups, like I mentioned, sometimes they'll consist of this general public, and we'll talk about why we're riding, and we'll talk about why research is important, which to folks not in the industry, they may not even know that tree care research exists. So it's something that we're happy to pass the word on as we're doing that and riding through all the different towns. Like I said, many of our riders are presenters, professors, researchers, and other professionals. So they love to actually get out and talk to the different people out in the communities about what it is they do. And as I'm sure many of you out there do the same, whenever you get on the topic, you just love to talk and talk and talk all about trees. So a lot of our events, they can be just as simple as meeting up with a local community group like this in an aid station, or we can even do larger events, which we'll go to the next slide on. One of our more famous events, if you've ever had a chance to see it or hopefully come out and join us, is our tree planting ceremony. We typically do several tree plantings throughout the route, just in the different communities that we're in. We work very closely with the different communities as far as getting a tree so that we can focus on planting the right tree in the right place, and then focus on the need for the trees in those areas. If it's a park that's needing something replaced, or windstorms, or what have you. And then in addition to that, one of the other things we do is we do have presentations, both for adults and for children. So for our children's presentations, one of our writers famously goes by Professor Pricklethorn. And if you ever want to look up his information, it's pricklethorn.com. But he travels all over the world talking to children all about trees and how they grow and why they're important, not just to us, but to the planet. And so he goes out there and he does a wonderful presentation. We set up several of those at different schools and different youth groups all along the way. But in addition to that, we also have adult programming that we have, which is a little bit more focused on some bigger issues. So those issues we'll talk about proper tree care. We can talk about advocating for your city's tree canopy. We can talk about pest or disease prevention. And then for all these presentations, like I said, we get assistance from a lot of our writers. We get them from our, any kind of local supporters that we might have, any kind of volunteers or other partner groups that we're with, or with local tree care companies who just want to help us engage with the community. So, anything that allows us to get out in the community and then share that these other companies and these other groups are out in those communities is how we like to focus, and we like to make sure that we make those connections, because connections are key. So then one of the benefits of the Turn of Trees taking place each year in a different location is that we get to cast a wider net as far as interacting with those local groups and spreading that knowledge outside of the tree care industry. It's important to make sure that people understand that hiring an arborist is good, and not just going out there and cutting stuff down willy-nilly, and making sure that we're planting the right trees in the right place and all of that great stuff. We like to make sure that even that basic knowledge to some of those groups is spread around. And like I said, we have many of our writers are presenters of different kinds, or they own their own tree care companies, so they know how to interact with local folks. And then in addition to that, we also get a chance to learn about the different challenges and the differences of caring for those trees in those different areas. Like I said, a lot of our writers come from all over the country. So if you're a writer that's from California, this year you're going to learn about what it takes to take care of the trees over in North and South Carolina, which might be, very different because of the, environment, or because of the different cities that we're in. The different cities have different problems that they anticipate as far as planting. So it's something that helps to gather that knowledge together. And like I said, it's much more than just a ride and just an outreach. It's a learning experience, not just for the groups that we're working with, but also with the groups, internally for us. We're all learning together. And as most of you know, arborists always consider themselves to be lifelong learners. So that's something that is great for us to focus on. This year, we'll be riding in a region that was decimated by Hurricane Helene 2 years ago. And that's actually one of the reasons why we wanted to go to the area and ride. And we're going to be working with a couple of local groups in the area. We are actually planning one specific volunteer day on our check-in day to help lend our experience and our manpower to the different groups in the area that are doing recovery projects. So it'll be a great way to help get us out in the community and then show exactly why that knowledge is important and why we're either replanting or cutting specific things down or what have you there. So I will go ahead and close by encouraging you all either to ride with us this year or share your information with anyone that might be interested in coming out and riding. We'd love to have you join our group, share our knowledge, and learn with us. This year. The QR code will take you to our information page so on our website. So if you're interested in learning more, go ahead and scan that or go ahead and reach out to me and I'll be happy to answer any kind of questions. We're actually already about a third of the way filled up to our capacity of 100 riders for this year, which is great because we only opened up registration literally 1 week ago today. So it's wonderful to get everybody signed up and getting everybody back on their bikes again for this year. Moving on to our next slide as we wrap up our presentation. One other note that I wanted to pass along to this group I thought might be interested in hearing about this information. We do house the Urban Forestry Foundation and help with the logistics to help the Urban Community Forestry Society on the Urban Forestry Foundation that was actually just announced this last fall, where we were able to partner our two organizations together. Donations made to UFF will provide funding for such successful UCFS programs as the Municipal Forestry Institute and the Municipal Arborist Exchange Program, as well as develop the new programs designed to improve education of municipal forestry professionals. So we're very happy to be linking up with UCFS now and helping to grow their programs there. As we wrap up, a couple of you might be asking, so what do we do now? So within the next week, it would be great if you signed up for our newsletter. We have a QR code right there if you want to scan that, or I did drop the link in the chat for you a little bit earlier, so you can go ahead and sign up. And that way you'll be able to get information on our upcoming webinars, which are free each year. And like Paul mentioned, we do have one coming up in just about a week and a half. That'll be February 10th. So you can go ahead and sign up for that one, and then you'll get information on any of the other ones that'll be coming later in the year as well. And then also always recommend that you follow us on socials and especially follow us on LinkedIn. So we share a lot of news and a lot of information about some of the research that's been coming out on LinkedIn. So it's a great place just to interact with us over the years. So. And then finally, just a quick little note, I wanted to remind you all, make sure you save the date. Just kind of going back to that, Tour de Trees is September 12th through 18th. Sign up today, and hopefully we'll see a couple of you out there. So thanks very much for your time. I think, was there one more slide on there or?
Actually, we're going to kind of take a mid-presentation break right now.
Wonderful.
So typically you do Q&A at the end, so we're going to play it a little bit differently right now, kind of mix things up a little bit. So we're going to do a little bit of Q&A, and then we're going to share some more recent research with you. Awesome. I'm going to turn it back over to Kevin to help coordinate.
Awesome. Thank you, Paul, and thank you, Jonathan. Love learning about Tour de Trees. Right before this call, we were all talking about how there's this Venn diagram of people who somehow get really passionate about trees and then they become really passionate about cycling. And it just dawned on me in the past year, since working in the tree world, I'm now doing bike races. So I don't know what's going on there, but there is some overlap. And I hope that we can pull together a Tennessee-based team. So I did want to mention to you all on the call who are in Tennessee, who are TUFC members, we are interested in kind of sponsoring a Tennessee-based team and would love to hear from you if you're interested in joining us. So please reach out to me. And then I did want to, as we transition to Q&A, encourage everybody to please add questions to the chat, and Katie will facilitate that. But I had a few questions of my own. Jonathan, I'm sure from riding in this, in the toiletries multiple times. If you had any just interesting stories to share, any particular like landmark trees that you remember visiting, or just highlights from previous rides.
Oh goodness. It's funny that you mentioned that because as I go out, I barely get to ride with everybody because I'm always out doing the different outreach events and planning all that and getting people from place to place. But at the same time, I also get to spend a little bit more time at some of the locations that we're at because I have to get there early and set up and do different things. So I really I love being able to go to the different arboretums, which we try to schedule along our routes the whole way. When we were in Iowa, which was 4 years ago, I think we were at a different local arboretum almost every day, which as you go to those different ones, they always have their own little personality, and some of them are bigger, and some of them are doing some kind of research or things like that. So it's great to just see those different locations and to see how the community really gets into what goes on at those places. And then actually to cap off that ride, we did end up at the Arbor Day Farm in Nebraska City that year. So it kind of culminated in a big, you get to see the little arboretums, the little arboretums, the little arboretums, and then the big one coming up right at the end there. So that kind of stuff is great. It's wonderful to interact with the different groups, which is always something we look forward to. We actually do. I had mentioned before the Empire Lions Club, but we do interact with Lions clubs a lot during the course of the week, and then other similar type, elks and foreign legions and different things like that. So it's great to see people come out and get excited about the different kinds of trees. And even last year when we were in Michigan, one of the first days, one of the things that we had set up was there was the local county conservation district. And what they did was in one of the local parks, they set up a um, uh, kind of an expo almost of different groups that were either focused on nature, focused on conservation, focused on getting outside. So they set something up with us that we help promote, and they help promote to the area just to show people that, look, this is what the city cares about, and this is the kind of things that we want you to be involved with, and these are some different groups that you can volunteer with. So it's always about just kind of making those connections to everybody, which is great. And like I said, our riders come back every year because they love being with each other, and they a lot of them are professionals. I won't get away from the fact that a lot of them do end up making those professional connections as well, which is great for everybody. And that's why a lot of them ride too, because they want to make sure that they get in with the other people that are at the other companies that they're trying to work with.
You mentioning the arboretum that y'all mentioned. I don't know if you and Paul are familiar, but TOC runs a statewide arboretum certification program, and so we have over 100 tree education sites, many of them uh, established just by community members, neighborhood groups, public parks, churches, schools, and yeah, if y'all ever are putting together a route in Tennessee, it'd be really cool to kind of link together all of the arboretum sites that we help support throughout the state. Or maybe there's another trail. My mind's kind of spinning now of things that TUC can do to get people to visit each of these sites. But yeah, thank you for sharing. Paul, I did want to ask a few questions on the grant side. I was curious if you could dive back into any upcoming deadlines application deadlines that we should be aware of. And then my second question on the education side for scholarships, I was wondering if you could also dive back into the eligibility for what types of students do they have to be in high school or college? Can it be folks who are more in apprentice type programs out of school? Uh, any details on eligibility there, I think would be
Yeah,
great to share.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thanks for the question. So we have two processes. We've got a spring process and a fall process. Spring process opens up in January, fall process opens up in August. For the research grants, we have what we call letter of intent and then a full application. And what the letter of intent is it's just a one pager. Here's our idea. Here's what we're thinking about, so that we can assess. If it's not going to be a match with the funders, the selection committee, then we won't want someone to waste their time filling out a full application. So the letters of intent are due first, and then there's the full applications that are due March 15th for both the grant applications and for the scholarships. For the student scholarships, we do have an online portal, so we have gotten great feedback that it's very easy to use. Students can log on, they can copy and paste information from other applications, they can connect with their references directly through the application portal. So for our scholarship programs right now, we've got 6 scholarship programs. Each of them is a little bit different in terms of eligibility. So encourage any student who might be interested to log onto the website and to take a look around. And when you go into the application portal, it'll ask you questions. Where are you living? Where are you going to school? Because some have a geographic preference. What is your major? We have some that are very specific major wise, and we have other ones that will say things like, or a related field, which makes it, much more open to folks. So really for students, it's undergrad students right now. We're in conversations and hope to offer a graduate student scholarship in the next year or two, but we don't have one quite yet. So it's for students who are undergrads, and one of them, I believe, is open to if you're a high school student who's going to be attending next year. Um, so yeah, so we encourage people to go on and to check those out.
Great. Thank you, Paul.
Yep.
I'll hand it over to Katie. It looks like we had a few questions come through the chat, so she can help facilitate those. And yeah, everyone, please feel free to add more questions in the chat, and we'll get through those and then kick it back over to you, Paul, if there's any remaining slides.
Yep. Part two.
All right,
Sure.
Katie?
Okay, great. Someone asked who came up with such a brilliant idea for the Tour des Trees?
I think Jonathan can tell the story. It's a good
Yeah,
story.
I could tell that a pretty good story. So, a little bit of extra Tree Fund history. So, Tree Fund actually came to light in 2002. But before that, ISA had the ISA Research Trust, which had started in 1977. So at one point in time in 1992, there was a group of 13 riders or 13 cycling enthusiasts that just kind of knew each other that said, "Hey, the ISA conference is coming to I believe it was Seattle that year." And they said, what would be cool? Let's ride our bikes all the way from somewhere to the start of the ISA conference. And that's where the first Tour de Trees actually happened. So it was kind of a just kind of underground thing where they wanted to ride their bikes and raise some money for tree research. So they ended up riding from Seattle, Washington, all the way to Oakland, California. It was about 900 miles, but at that time they did not have a lot of GPS. They did not have a lot of maps. So a lot of them ended up riding over 1,000 miles over about 7 days, getting from one place to the other. So we're much more organized than that now.
You answered this in the chat, but someone asked if the tour has ever gone through Tennessee, and you said it did actually go through the Nashville area in 2019, but have you ever considered, they also mention Chattanooga or even from Memphis all the way over to Chattanooga?
Everything's always on the table when we're planning out the different years. We talk with our riders about places they want to go. We also look for where some of our supporters are, some of our tree fund partners, for instance, not last year but 2 years ago when we went up to New England. It was the 100th anniversary of ISA. We just we're planning everything around going to the Bartlett Arboretum, which not only is down the street from Bartlett Tree Care's headquarters, but it's also where ISA actually started. So there's a lot of kind of synergy going on with all of that. So it's always a nice puzzle to put together every year to figure out where it is we're going to go next. But everything's always on the table, and if it's a nice spot, and we get some people that want to go there. Absolutely.
All right, and I have one more question for you. What was the $4,000 match challenge result last year?
Oh, Paul, I think that's from our webinar at the end of the year, if I remember right.
Yes.
Yes,
Did we? That is a great question. And did
we
we
did.
pull
I do know what that is. If you
the
want to chat
numbers?
for
I don't
1 second, I will give you the exact number.
get those numbers. I don't know off the top of my head.
We collected donations that week from, hold on 1 second. I know it's there. We were able to collect $2,462 worth of donations that ended up getting matched.
Just huge. That's awesome.
Yeah.
All right, well, those are all the questions I have for now.
So,
All right, great. Thanks, Katie. Yeah, I'll kick it back over to Paul,
yep,
go through a few more slides, and then
yep,
we might have another period at the very end for a few questions and wrap up.
yep,
So go ahead, Paul.
absolutely. Thank you. Appreciate it for you both. I'm going to share my screen again. All right, we have a little bit of time, so wanted to, for part two of this, to go through some of the other recently completed research projects that have been turned in to give you a little bit more flavor for the different types of things. So these next couple slides are from the Barbarinas Grant Program, and this focuses on issues that might be of interest, especially to folks who work with nurseries who are working with tree planting systems. And Ryan Monroe, NYK Nurseries out of Canada. If anyone is on LinkedIn, Ryan is very active on social and is very generous about posting. He is constantly researching different types of root system planting products, and he is doing a lot about soil quality, species selection, looking at different contractors. And what he was doing with his study is he was looking at an innovative air root pruning growing system at his nursery in Ontario. And he was looking at trying to figure out how can we grow trees faster, healthier, and with a much higher root system quality than what current industry standards might allow. And also he was looking at the performance of different commercially available air root pruning trays and containers. So his study is a fascinating one, and you can find out more about the results on our website. Dr. Basuk from Cornell was looking at planting and transplanting, looking at hickories in particular. And so she was looking at pecan, kingnut hickory, shagbark hickory, and the taproots that are connected with this. And she was really looking at would the modified stool bed method for propagating hickories work out, and how could it be refined? And what she found is that it actually didn't work out the way that she was hoping. So it was it was a negative result in some ways, but it was also positive that contributed to here's something to not do, which is important as well. Dr. Bayer at UMass Amherst, she was looking at Cornus Florida planting, and she was looking specifically at the establishment of the bare root liners, and that there's been problems in terms of high mortality over time. So she's noted that some of the newer pots, especially those that are made out of fabric, have been developed to reduce circling roots and to also improve plant health. She also looked at irrigation management during liner establishment, and her findings, she found that a number of things that might be helpful in terms of planting. She did look at both peat moss and biochar, and found that they were increasing the watering holding capacity of the pine bark substrate. And I guess that I'll leave it at that as the teaser, and that's something that you can again look on our website, look at the videos, and find out more about what she learned during her 2022 dueling grant program. A couple really interesting things here. This one came out of the Davy Institute, and Dr. Whitney was looking at the effects of predatory midges in controlling aphid populations on linden street trees. One of the cool things about these midges is that they don't have a very large flight distance, so they can't fly long distances. So wherever you apply them, they're likely to stay on those trees. And so what they were doing was applying those predatory aphids onto the trees to lay eggs nearby because they're adept at sensing the aphid, I think you call it honeydew. And then those midge larvae are voracious predators of the aphid species. So the theory is that the larvae will then feast on the aphids, and that will help mitigate aphid populations in a way that is environmentally friendly, cost effective, and also probably equally convenient as to a lot of the other applications that might be out there. This slide is going to talk just a little bit about when we have the researchers present, sometimes they go into great details about things. And this is just an example of, they were really trying to look at integrated pest management in a way that was going to be friendly to the environment in the best way possible. Dr. Murray, this is from Tarleton State University. And what he was looking at was diversity. And he was looking at a couple of ecoregions in Texas, and looking at native species for them that were, buckeyes, Eve's necklace, rusty blackhaw, and that these adaptations have been adept at surviving in the harsh environments of Texas. And they've evolved to support embryo survival and include dense protective shell coats, long dormancy periods, long stratification periods to break dormancy, and also long duration or unique germination requirements. And so what he was looking at was based upon maturity level of seeds, their research was looking at hoping to increase the propagation success by utilizing different sowing times throughout embryo development, also looking at conducting different hormonal treatments with the intent to slow down seed shell generation and reduce stratification periods, and then explore different scarification and stratification techniques once the seeds reach mature dormancy. Fascinating study. Dr. Susan Day, she was doing a little bit more urban forest management, working with her team of graduate students. And it was looking at land development. And one of the primary drivers of urban tree canopy loss is land development. And that municipalities rely on a variety of tree protection strategies to really help stem the loss from new land development. But often after development, for those of you who are in urban forestry, you know that a lot of times trees will continue to die even when there might be effective plans in place. So they were looking at the city of Surrey in British Columbia. They use LIDAR and ground surveys to address canopy, or to assess, canopy loss. And this was 10 to 20 years after development. And what they were doing is they were linking the trees lost to position within the landscape, and then planned and implemented practices as documented in city records and initial and follow-up arborist reports. So they were looking at the timed trajectory of long-term tree loss and trying to see if there were violations in the tree protection plans or if the plans were inadequate to begin with. So this is a really great example of a longitudinal study that was funded. Highland R. Johns Research Fund, just will pause here for just a moment. It's another one of our research funding programs, awards up to $25,000 annually. This was recently endowed by by Asplund, and as part of their centennial celebration, helping out in 2028. Um, so that's one to be aware of. This presentation is actually going to be this grant. This project has been going on for a number of years and has had a number of iterations. And Dr. Hauer is going to be presenting this more details, updated in just a couple months with Tree Fund. So I'm going to skip through this one so you can watch the webinar and learn from him directly. We already talked about Dr. Hednick's Morgenroth. This was an interesting one out of Zimbabwe. And this one was looking um, at, hold on just a second, just lost my notes. Looking at pathogens, and he was looking at the National Herbarium and Botanic Garden of Zimbabwe, and it's in the heart of Harare. And what he was looking at was they are having challenges with pathogens causing root and stem rot in the garden. And are they coming from the native forests of Zimbabwe or various localities globally where exotic tree species might be imported from? So, excuse me, once introduced in the garden, the pathogens were then adapting to infect phylogenetically related host trees and therefore expand their host range. So what they did is they were extensively surveying and collecting samples of different pathogens from native and non-native tree hosts in the garden, and also identify pathogens using DNA barcoding and multi-gene phylogenics, and to develop whether they are native to Zimbabwe or whether they were introduced there. And then the information gathered will be useful to identification and management. And this is something, I want to pause here for just a moment. This is through our international grant making program. And some folks might be thinking, this is in Zimbabwe. What does this have to do with me here in Tennessee or wherever you might be tuning in from? But this study, along with a lot of the other studies that we support, they all are taking place in different parts of either the United States or around the world. And it's looking at what did they learn and what might be the lessons. What might be the lessons for those of us who are introducing non-native trees into our communities, either purposefully or non-purposefully. Maybe we don't have challenges with a specific disease or pest in our area right now, but it might be coming our way. Or maybe the lessons learned about emerald ash borer can relate to another pest. So it's all fascinating stuff. Just a couple more, and then I will pause, and we'll do final Q&A, and then we'll turn you back over to the rest of your day. Just get so excited about this stuff. So this is a study that was done out of UGA, and she just reported out on this. I believe it was just last year. And Dr. Abney and her team, they were looking at biochar, which is something we've heard a lot about. And they were looking at it specifically to improve the community tree vault soils. And they, in their webinar, they talk a lot about biochar in particular, which is a helpful kind of 101. But also they looked at how the method of biochar application, how that impacts tree health and tree growth. And they were looking at two specific tree species that had not been examined with biochar. And also, they were looking at it from a different angle. So they were varying the concentration and the application method of biochar and then comparing multiple tree species. So it's going to allow, it was allowing them to build a tool in terms to calculate the recommended dose for biochar. So if you're curious about, how much is enough, how much is too much, this study is something to look into a little bit further. And I think I'm going to stop there and pause. We're about 5 till. So again, that's just a couple more studies. Wanted to give you a taste of some of the things that have been funded recently. Happy to answer non-study specific questions at this point. And Kevin, I'll turn it to you.
Yeah, thank you, Paul. I think that's really helpful going into some of those specific research projects. I know when Imagine from the ISA side, suggested that y'all join us for webinar series, it was rooted in her familiarity with a lot of y'all's research that has been funded and how impactful and interesting it is. I'm curious for those of us who want to dive deeper into any of those that you just shared or others, where would be the best way for us to dive a little bit deeper.
Yep. So, number one way is going to be to go on the website and sign up for the newsletter. So that's going to tell you about the upcoming webinars, and each month is going to give you it's 3 paragraphs. So it's a very quick, digestible bite of current research that was completed. So that's a great place to learn more. And then on our website, you can search. So if you're interested in learning more about biochar, you can go to our website, you can search for biochar. It's going to take you to all the studies that we've supported related to biochar. And then if there is a webinar there, the webinars are all archived on our YouTube channel, so you can watch the webinar. This fall, we surveyed participants, and one of the things that was surprising to me as a non-arborist, I didn't realize how many folks are watching the webinars more than one time. And there's so much information that's there that often it's helpful to watch a second time, or you might watch it the first time, biochar, and learn a little bit. And then, 6 months later, you're applying biochar within your community. And then you have a question and you want to learn more. So these are always available so that people can touch base with them.
Thank you, Paul. It looks like we haven't had any other questions come through. I'm going to hand it over to Katie real quick to go over CEU submission, and so she can show as a QR code. I also just put a link in the chat. So for those of you who signed up to receive CEUs today, there is a jot form link for you to record your attendance. In order to receive CEUs, you had to attend for at least 45 minutes of this and submit your information through that form. But yeah, I'll hand it over to Katie to get that slide up. And while she's doing that, I also want to mention this is our first webinar of the year. I'm sure many of you have been coming to these routinely, but we'll be doing them every month again for 2026. And we're still filling out the schedule, so please feel free to share your ideas with us. We're always looking for interesting speakers, topics, diving deeper into research, as Paul was sharing so many of those. So please feel free to share your feedback with us directly. And then I also wanted to point out that for those of you who aren't TUFC members, if you sign up for a membership, it's $50 a year. So attending 5 webinars pays for itself. As a member, you also receive discount to our annual conference and our workshops. So if you are a routine attendee to our webinar series, I definitely encourage you to go ahead and sign up for a membership, and it more than pays for itself. So that link is in the chat as well. And yeah, with that, I think we're all good to go, unless Paul, Jonathan, Katie, you all have any final words.
I'll just say thank you again for your time and for everyone for tuning in. I know that many of you are digging out of snow, so I hope that everyone stays warm, and cheers to everyone dealing with the aftermath of the storm. And I wish you warm days ahead. And if you have any questions, our emails were part of the presentation, and certainly you can go to treefund.org and find us there. We're happy to answer any questions that anyone might have. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Jonathan, Katie, everyone for joining us. Please take care and stay safe and warm. And we'll see you next month.